Oh boy. Today on Ancient DOS Games, we're taking a look at Bug World, a game clearly inspired by both ZZT and MegaZeux, as it has the same style of gameplay and borrows many of the same design elements from each, all presented with VGA graphics as opposed to using a text mode. Now, at first glance, it looks like this is going to be a very competent clone of those game creation systems. But no. This game is a freaking disaster. Literally everything has been done wrong, and I really do mean everything. It's actually kind of impressive just how completely off the mark this ended up being. So much so that it's kind of a good object lesson as to why experienced game developers do certain things the way they do. Just to give you a taste of what's going on before we dive into the more serious issues, whenever you pick up a common built-in object in ZZT, such as a pack of ammo or a gem, you get a message the first time telling you what you picked up, and then from that point forward, the message never repeats because it doesn't need to. You know what you're getting. Here in Bug World, picking up mundane items generates a message telling you what it does every single time. It's completely unnecessary and clutters the screen to a small degree, not to mention after a while ends up feeling slightly condescending. Now, that's one of the more minor issues with the game, but because the game is absolutely loaded with problems, many of which were intentional design decisions, and I think the more fitting thing to do will be to go over what's wrong with this game and why those things are wrong, as some of the problems are very obvious, but some of them are not, and some of them feel like quote-unquote answers to shortcomings from both ZZT and MegaZeux, which end up making the experience worse rather than better. Bug World was released by one Kai's Dukes, going by the moniker of KD Games back in 1998, and is effectively a one-player action game. It only supports VGA 320x200, 256 color graphics, and PC speaker sound effects. As for its current release date, it's always been freeware, and as of this moment, the simplest place to acquire it from is the DOS Games website at www.dosgames.com. Yeah, that's it for the game stats. They often are this simple when it comes to indie DOS titles released in the latter half of the 90s. But before we start playing, I should point out that the game technically has a story, but it's paper thin. You install the new game on your computer, then a ton of bugs started coming out of the computer, so you grab your trusty Magnum and prepare to blast them all into oblivion. The game does also provide a rundown of all the different objects you'll come across, but doesn't really explain what most of them are for or how any of the enemies behave. Though, as we're going to see shortly, there wouldn't really be much to say. So, when you start a new game, you begin in a sort of hub world, which connects the game's 9 levels together, but we're already hitting 2 of the dumbest issues I've ever seen in any game. Firstly, where the heck is level 1? If we go north at the start, we reach level 3, if we go east, we reach level 6, and if we go south, we reach levels 2 and 4. In fact, the way you get to level 1 is to first beat level 3, which makes the level entrance non-solid so you can walk through it, and both level 1 and level 5 are found beyond that point. The other issue here is that the levels aren't even labeled, so you don't even know which level you're about to go into until after you go into it. Heck, to enter a level, you first touch the level entrance, which generates a generic message at the bottom, and then you press spacebar and the level begins. That message could have been used to relay the level number, but nope. Until you actually enter a level, you have no idea which level you're going into. And once you go into a level though, you're gonna notice right away that the controls, despite being very simple, have some bizarre responsiveness issues. Now, moving up, down, left, and right is fairly responsive, or rather responsive enough that you can get around, but firing your gun is a trip. Firstly, unlike ZZT and MegaZeux, where you hold down Shift or Spacebar respectively and press a direction to fire in that direction, here you tap Spacebar and so long as you don't take a hit, you will fire a shot 2 frames later in the direction you last moved in. Yeah, not only can you not aim without moving straight towards what you want to shoot, but there's a 2-frame delay between pressing spacebar and a shot being fired, and if you get hit during this delay, your shot is cancelled. This includes if you get hit during the brief period of post-hit invincibility you get. Which, okay, is at least one thing the game did get right, is make it so that you can't take damage more than once per couple of seconds. But this makes attacking enemies an extremely laggy prospect, not helped by the AI being, bad. I mean, sure, ZZT and MegaZeux had very simple AI for its built-in enemies, but they all had a purpose to some respect. The tigers would shoot, bears would stay motionless until you got close, spiders could only move over top of webs, snakes would mostly just follow the walls. Enemy AI is more interesting when it has a variety of behaviors and some semblance of predictability. Here in Bug World, despite the very large number of different kinds of enemies, they all behave in one of only three ways. Randomly moving around with a desire to be in line with the player, randomly moving around with a desire to be in line with the player and then rushing the player, or randomly moving around with a desire to not be in line with the player. Coupled with the delayed shooting mechanics, this makes it extraordinarily difficult to actually hit anything, and gives virtually no personality to any of the enemies you fight. There are a few idiosyncrasies you can take advantage of, such as how red spiders actually can't move over top of webs, but these traits really aren't all that helpful. Now, you might be thinking that one way to cure yourself of the lag issues would be to just run the game on high-end hardware or with a high cycles count in DOSBox. Which, yes, will indeed get rid of that lag by making the lagged frames pass way quicker. Remember, action is still happening on those lagged frames. The game is designed so that frames pass on a timer which is timed perfectly, but every keystroke and even the delay frames between pressing spacebar and firing a shot also advances frames. This makes the game speed shoot up as you're performing more and more actions, which really doesn't help anything. Moving on to some of the level design issues, you totally can screw yourself in some of these levels, forcing you to quit out and restart them. This brings us to a few aspects which, again, were not done right, such as the map. While in a proper level, not the hub world, you can press the M key to bring up an active map of the level, with the gameplay still proceeding while this map is active. In fact, playing the game on this map screen is totally viable, so long as you understand what everything is. However, pressing M again doesn't close the map. You have to press Escape to close it, thus requiring you to move your hand away from the spacebar to do so, leaving you vulnerable for a brief moment in a heated situation. Now, the game doesn't actually have any puzzle elements whatsoever. Everything is straightforward action and shooting, so by that logic, there wouldn't seem to be any reasons for mid-level saving. Well, nevertheless, when you go into the menu, there are indeed options to save and load your game, which don't actually do anything. This is because no, there is no mid-level saving. The save and load options in the menu only work while out in the hub world, and you better be darn sure you want to save or load when you press them, because they are committal. If you select to save or load your game, you cannot cancel this, and must then select a save slot to save or load from. And guess what? If you load from an empty slot, it's basically like starting the game all over again. Yeah, found that out the hard way after I'd cleared a couple levels early in my playthrough. Let's tackle a few more odd design decisions which may or may not be bugs. Honestly, it's hard to tell with some of these. One of the more annoying issues is that bullets can't fly over top of webs or water. And in fact, if you are on top of webs or water, you're not allowed to shoot, even if the direction you'd be aiming in has blank space in front of it. This is a major issue in the final level, but even in the early levels, this can end up creating situations where you have no choice but to take a hit in order to pass into the next area you need to go into, because enemies are cluttering the spots you need to move into. Again, I'm not sure if this is a bug or not, because a lot of the way this game is designed feels like it was trying to come up with solutions to shortcomings in ZZT and MegaZeux, and not being able to shoot over webs and water means you can't safely clear out enemies ahead of time in areas which are across such passages. Another annoying problem is the way collisions with enemies work in that they sometimes don't. Like, seriously, you will frequently go to touch an enemy, or an enemy will go to touch you, and no contact is actually made, and I have no idea how this is happening. But it results in the enemy and the player sharing the same tile space. Eventually they may touch, but it's more likely someone will have to move first. Now, touching enemies intentionally is actually kind of an important trick to survival, as you can still kill enemies in this manner during your post-hit invincibility time. Thus, a surprisingly good tactic for dealing with large clusters of enemies is to just waltz right into it and touch as many of the enemies as you can as fast as you can, especially since movement is so much more responsive than shooting your gun. Not even the sound effects are spared issues, though. One of the really important things with any game is making it so that there's a clear distinction in what's happening with the sound effects you hear. Now, even in ZZT and MegaZeux, there is a distinct difference in sound effects depending on what you hit with your gun. Here in Bug World, the same sound is used to represent shooting an enemy as is used to represent shooting a solid wall. Thus, for any bullets which make contact off-screen, you have no way to confirm by audio alone if your shots even made their mark. Okay, so I think I'm finally running out of general issues to fuss about, but as you can see, that's pretty much all this game comes down to, is dealing with issues which were absent from the games which inspired this one. Mostly. ZZT and MegaZeux clearly had certain issues, but there were often ways to deal with them when creating your own content. Since Bug World doesn't have an editor included by default, it doesn't lend itself at all to having custom content made for it. Though I did check and notice the level data is completely uncompressed and not even remotely obfuscated, so building an editor for this thing should be a piece of cake if you really wanted to for whatever reason. Plus, for a time, the author was offering a free level editor to anyone who emailed him. But I'm not certain if the email still works, especially given that it's a college email address, virtually all of which from the 90s don't work anymore. Well, that's not to say I'm done talking about this thing yet, though. For instance, one thing I find kind of annoying, though it's not that big of a deal really, is that unlike ZZT and MegaZeux, where your health really didn't have much of a limit, here in Bug World you get 9 hit points and die if you take a hit with no hit points left. Thus effectively you have 10 hit points. But if you pick up a gem while at maximum, it totally wastes that gem's healing powers. So you end up frequently having to backtrack back to gems you leave behind because you're full up when you first find them. Again, that's not really a problem, just not what I would expect given how this game plays. There's also coins you can collect, but unlike in MegaZeux, where coins could act as a form of currency, here they're just worth points, which are completely useless other than for making high scores. There's definitely some minor issues with the graphics too. The HUD, for instance, is way bigger than it needs to be, and could have easily been consolidated down into a single line status bar at the top of the screen. Though I get it was done the way it was to emulate ZZT to some extent. Well, actually, if you needed more proof that the game was blatantly trying to be a ZZT or MegaZeux clone, then there it is, as the key symbols on the HUD are the same ones used in those two game systems, whereas the actual keys you find in the world have custom sprites, which actually look like keys. And yes, I know the keys in MegaZeux actually look like keys as well, but if you look at which symbol in the ASCII character set was modified into that appearance, guess what? Yeah, it's the same character. One thing that's really weird though is that when you die, the graphics are replaced with alternative grayscale graphics, but the tiles don't actually match up correctly, which kind of suggests that the grayscale tile graphics weren't kept up to date with the rest of the tile graphics. Again, this one's very minor, but little things like this add up to kind of paint a bigger picture of what's going on with how the game is developed. In any event, once you beat the first 8 levels, which requires finding a secret passage on the hub world in order to access levels 7 and 8, you gain access to level 9, the final level. And this level starts you with your choice of super weapon and plenty of ammo. The two super weapons are the X-Blaster, which fires a laser that cuts through all enemies in its path, and a quote, BFG 10,000, which just produces a large blast in front of you, which again, kills anything caught in the blast. But in both cases, the weapons are still incapable of passing over top of non-solid tiles, like webs and water. Which is kind of a problem, given that the final level is freaking loaded with spiders, dropping webs everywhere. What's worse is that when you step on a web, not only can you not fire any weapons, but every time you press a direction to move off of a web, it is a random chance if you're going to actually move or not. Now, sometimes you step off of a web immediately, and sometimes it takes over a dozen key presses. Getting around this final level is a bit of a nightmare because of this. And then you finally get up to the final boss, the Queen Bug. And she's impossible to take out. Seriously, I burned hundreds of units of ammo trying to do this, and it didn't work. I mean, maybe the final boss isn't finished? I wouldn't put it past this game to be unfinished, given that you can't access level 1 without first clearing level 3, but wait a minute. The text box you find on level 1 has a message stating, "The last bug can only be defeated with the Magnum." Do I really need to explain what's wrong with this setup? The last level throws a bandana on the character and gives you 2 copies each of the 2 super weapons you can acquire, and the instant you collect any of them, you are screwed, because there is no way to switch back to the Magnum once you pick up a super weapon. You need to survive the massive onslaught of spiders in this level with nothing but a pea shooter, and then somehow have to get shots to land on the queen bug and... wait, the queen dies in literally just 1 shot. Good. I am okay with this turn of events. With defeating the queen, then makes the level end door appear back where you started the level, and then you get a cliffhanger ending with a to be continued, just to throw one final insult at the player. Overall, Bug World is a low-quality fan game inspired by ZZT and MegaZeux, lacking pretty much all the qualities which made those game systems enjoyable, and screwing up virtually every aspect of the design every step of the way. And normally I'm not this hard on freeware because, let's face it, a lot of the time freeware is made by just one person who has a passion to make something, regardless of how it turns out. However, oftentimes that passion can be misguided, such as thinking something looks really easy to make, and then the attempt is made and the realization kicks in really fast that, oh, maybe it's not actually that easy. And then you end up with sloppy solutions to development problems due to a lack of experience to guide proper solutions, and then pride in what you did accomplish blinds you to the actual level of quality of what you've produced. But the thing is, that's something I myself have experienced. I started learning to program way back in the early 90s when I was 10 years old, and I had virtually no guidance on this at all, so I was having to figure out a lot of this on my own accord without the proper tools. When I produced something playable, regardless of how good it was, I was proud of what I pulled off and would want to show it around. But average people are a lot less forgiving of something they have no personal stake in. Thus, when you get feedback on something you made is when you get pulled back to reality. And keep in mind, too, these are the reactions you're getting from the people you trusted to give you an appropriate opinion. Imagine how bad it gets when totally random strangers are now giving you feedback instead. To that end, I'm about 99% certain that Kai's Dukes, if he's still out there, is very aware of how lackluster his creation here is, so me pointing that out isn't a strike against him or anything of the sort. Bug World is an objectively bad game through and through, but was clearly made with the same sort of passion anyone who makes games has, just not with enough experience at the time to do it right. But making that attempt in the first place is how you get experience, as you then get your feedback and learn from your mistakes. Or in some cases, learn that you really don't enjoy the feedback process or game development in general and then never do it again. That happens too. Not everyone is cut out to make games, and sometimes the only way to know if you are or not is to go through the entire process and see where you end up. Because of the whole thing with key presses advancing game frames, trying to find an appropriate cycles count was very tricky, but you also need to manually set the core to dynamic mode because this game burns way more power than it really should. Again, owing to the nature of the game. I ultimately settled on a cycles count of 42,000, which yes, still feels a bit laggy, but I found is the highest I could push it without the game ever going too fast. Anywho, that'll be all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Next up, 2 Saturdays from now, on September 16th, will be another review, episode 318, and we're going to be taking a look at another flight simulator, but one which gives the player a very unique reason for climbing into the cockpit of an airplane. So be sure to stay tuned to see a very different kind of flight simulator. Thanks for watching, everyone, and extra special thanks to all the folks shown here supporting me on Patreon. If you'd like to support the show directly and see your name here as well, head on over to patreon.com/KASICK.